Thank you, everyone, again, for your patience. I am really thrilled to welcome you to ESMoA. My name is Holly M. Crawford. I am the Manager of Education. Before you leave today, please do take a moment to explore our current experience. That's our word for exhibition. It's called Grounded. John Davola and Zoe Crow approach LAX from different directions. And I'm pleased to introduce our panel. But before I get there, I just want to talk a little bit about what brings us here today. For many of us in the audience, LAX is our neighbor, and for some, an employer. It is also the portal that many of us enter when we first come to LA, whether it is looking for a new life or just visiting. LAX is also a wellspring for creativity and innovation, having inspired numerous tech and aerospace industries, at least one hit song, and ESMoA's Experience 35 Grounded, John Davola and Zoe Crow approach LAX from different directions. According to a very recent report from Business Insider, LAX is the 5th busiest airport in the world. With over 85 million passengers traveling through LAX annually, or about 230,000 per day, LAX is the 2nd busiest airport in the country. Originally known as Mines Field, the LAX site has been used as a general aviation field since 1928 and began offering commercial airline service in 1946. LAX also serves as joyful entertainment for aircraft enthusiasts who can watch planes take off at Clutter's Park on Imperial Highway or come in for landing at In-N-Out on Sepulveda Boulevard. School children, history aficionados, and lifelong learners of any age can also visit the Flight Path Learning Center and Museum, a unique aviation museum operating on the site of a former charter airline terminal, also on Imperial Highway. The airport is currently undergoing extensive remodeling and has grown its own art collection with a number of large-scale artworks currently on view. LAX has also created an estimated 59,000 jobs and provided $126.6 billion in revenue for the local economy, according to a report from Los Angeles Economic Development Corps cited in a 2016 article from the business journals. As LAX continues to serve the region and the world, ESMoA is hosting today's forum as an honored member of the El Segundo community to discuss challenges and creative solutions that have potential to impact El Segundo and our neighbors, such as environment, access, transportation, tourism, architecture, and housing, and of course, art. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce to you our esteemed panel, Los Angeles World Airport CEO, Deborah Flint, Grounded curator, Colin Westerbeck, featured Grounded artist, Zoe Crow, Mayor Boyles of El Segundo, and Sarah Childs from Starburst Accelerator. And now I would ask each panelist to take a few moments and tell us a little bit more about yourselves.
Thank you so much, Holly, and thank you everyone here at ESMoA. It's a pleasure to be back. My name is Zoe Crow. I am an artist. I've been in LA since the late 90s. I went to Cal Arts for my MFA and recently moved to New York. So we can talk about that. But I have a complete obsession with what I call the imaginary of Los Angeles, which is what I often describe as the obsession with when one hears about LA or reads about LA or sees in movies about LA. That the whole notion of Los Angeles was based on this, is when it was started on this promise of renewal, of starting over, of leaving your past behind. Los Angeles often is a city without a sense of its own history, a place of sense of forgetting all the time, things changing overnight. And this project that I did, just to give you a little bit of context, was shot between 2001 and 2005. So in an interesting way, it's becoming historical in a way that I didn't intend or think about when I was actually photographing it. And the idea I had was to literally try to unpack what it meant to be in this city without a center, and this notion of constantly arriving into LA. And you get there after this fantasy, all these fantasies you've had, and you finally show up and you're like, this is Los Angeles, right? Where are the palm trees? What is this mysterious place known as LAX that's bigger than many cities? I can keep going. But brief introduction, anyway, so pleasure to be here. And I can talk more later. Yeah, okay.
Yes, I'm Colin Westerbeck, and briefly, because how this show came together and my relationship with this institution was sort of complicated. After having been a curator of photography at the Art Institute of Chicago for 17 years, I moved here in 2003. And I had already known John DeVola's work when I was at the Art Institute of Chicago. And I had always liked the noise abatement zone, the LAX and AZ project a lot. But I got to know John a lot better because I spent 3 years from 2008 to 2011 running the California Museum of Photography at UC Riverside, where John himself teaches. So my relationship with him and my awareness of his work became more intense then. But the first step toward this exhibition was actually during the opening events for this museum. I was privileged enough and very happy to be invited to some of them. And one of them was on the roof. And when I went up on the roof, I realized that I was looking directly into LAX. And looking the other way, I was looking into where all the jet fuel, I guess, is being manufactured. So that made me started to think about John's work and how it fits into the context of this area of the city. And then about 2 years ago, I met Zoe at the home of a collector who had a large amount of her work, although not work from the Out the Window series. But from that basis, she gave me a book that had that series in it, and she and I got to know each other. And I realized that the two bodies of work, they're so different, they're a generation apart. Zoe was born the year that John did this body of work, 1975. And the history not only of this area and of the subject matter of LAX, but really the history of photography and the way it's changed from the time that John did his first project to the time that Zoe did this one was really right for this. And so I came and proposed it here, and fortunately it was welcomed, and that's how the show came together.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Childs. I work for Starburst Accelerator, and we are based in El Segundo, but also in 6 countries around the world. And what we do is we bring in our aerospace startups into our ecosystem. Anything from satellites to supersonic airplanes to data science to anything that an aerospace company would be interested in. And like I said, we're in 6 companies internationally, so we have a really broad landscape, a broad view of what is happening across the world. And I think that brings an interesting perspective into it. I went to USC and I graduated, and fight on. Yeah. I studied engineering there, and most of the engineers that graduate these days realize that Silicon Valley is pulling them. And so, of course, I was pulled to Silicon Valley all 4 years. And then when I graduated, I realized I would have been crazy to go up there because all of the interesting, exciting aerospace stuff is happening down here. And so planted a root down in Southern California, and it's been so exciting. Actually, there are really, really unbelievable startups happening down here. So, yeah.
Hi, great to be here. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the conversation amongst this esteemed panel, and it just feels wonderful to be here in El Segundo this afternoon. Thank you. My daughter Allison has joined me and us this afternoon, and as we were driving here, because we live a little bit further south, she was like, "Mom, I just love El Segundo." And literally, we have come and just driven around the neighborhoods and around the downtown sections because it reminds us of places where we're from. I traveled a lot as a young person with my parents seeking opportunity, and they were always looking to improve the humble beginnings from which they started their lives. And there was this one moment when we were traveling and coming back from Africa, and I was a teenager, and a typical teenager, so I was happy to actually be leaving Africa at that time. And we landed at Schiphol Airport, and it was such such an impactful, almost spiritual thing for me to feel like I was connected back to a world, and I could see it and I could feel it in the airport. At that point in time, I didn't know that there was such a thing as an airport management team or even an airport CEO, but serendipity would have it that 20 years later or so, I found an opportunity to work in an organization up in the Bay Area that ran a seaport, a development, a commercial development, and an airport. And that moment came back to me, and I was like, this is fascinating. And I've had the privilege of being able to work pretty much all of my career in the airport leadership and management industry. It's been 3 years now, this past summer actually, that I've had the privilege of leading an incredible team at Los Angeles World Airports. And I know we'll talk more about LAX specifically. You may know that Los Angeles World Airports is today LAX and Van Nuys. And indeed, we're in the middle of yet another transformation, a transformation that holds so much for us and for the travelers and for the economy, but also for our neighbors, and the social responsibility vision that we have at LAX. It's an incredibly exciting time. I'll pause here a moment, but I just love the ability to have this conversation about arts and how art and technology, they're all so intersected and interwoven in a unique and special way, and I love framing it through the lens of LAX, so thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. My name is Drew Boyles, Mayor of El Segundo, and I'll go back to the age of 17. Left home and joined the military, so eventually moved west and went from the military through to working for companies like Starbucks Corporation, worked for Arthur Andersen. Some of you may remember that. This is pre-Enron, obviously. I had nothing to do with shredding in Houston, never stepped foot in Houston, Texas, and I'm standing by that to this day. From there, I went into entrepreneurial ventures, and I've been doing that for the last 20 years, almost 20 years now. So I own and operate several companies. I've done probably 26 startups, acquisitions, or divestitures, and that's what I do for a living. I also find time to coach soccer teams, and I have a goal to surf every country in the world before I die. I've surfed 17, and I've got 2 more ahead of me this year, but I got to ramp up the rate at which I'm achieving those when I look at my mortality rate ahead. So anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. Deborah and I have already started a great dialogue. I think part of the intent here is for us to come together sometimes with different sides of an argument, if you will. And Deborah and I have already started that. We had lunch at Sawzall right across the street a couple months back. And further to the intent of bringing people together and figuring out how we can leverage this incredible asset of LAX and this incredible city of El Segundo while maintaining the community and protecting our interests. Just today, Deborah, Ava, and I were in the lobby talking about how we could beautify the entry point into El Segundo off of Vista Del Mar. So Ava, it's already working. The wheels are turning, and thank you for having me.
Thank you all so very much for those. Oh man, I want to take you all out for coffee and just continue more. Well, to get us started today, CEO Flint, would you mind providing us an overview of the exciting things that are happening? Yeah, we've got the map behind us right over here. But some of the exciting projects that LAX is undergoing, and if there's any that particular that you're just really excited about.
Absolutely. Anyone want to fix traffic in and around LAX? That creates probably the most excitement when, certainly for me, who as myself and 50,000 other employees that come to work there every day, we have to deal with that. But obviously, just for a world-class airport that this region deserves, accessibility, access is just so important. It's important to be reliable. From what is called soul-crushing pushing traffic here in the region. We know that so much time is wasted in traffic around the region, whether that's time in being able to spend time with your families or to be more productive or to have extracurricular activities and take care of ourselves. We need to have more efficient transportation. And of course, the region has made a lot, is and has been making investment in that regard. But one of the most exciting projects that we have at LAX is what's called our LAMP program, our Landside Access Modernization Program. Not the glitziest name, but it's such a fundamental piece of infrastructure that we are developing. And it is finally to bring rail into the airport, connecting to the Crenshaw line, and connecting to a rental car facility. Right now, there are over 24 different rental car businesses spread out all across the area, and they all run their own operation, their own buses. They're on footprints that are too small. It's inefficient. It's a very, very difficult welcome to the region for all of the guests that are coming through the airport and also leaving. It takes an incredible amount of time, and of course lends so much congestion to the surrounding streets. So this past week, our board approved our award of our second P3 development. And I'll speak to P3s, I hope, at some point in this, because how we are delivering these projects is also symbolic of who we are and where we're going as an organization, which is public-private partnership. But our board approved the second piece, the anchor, if you will, of our LAMP program this past week, and that is to develop the consolidated rent-a-car facility, which will be at 96th Avenue, Manchester, and the 405. There'll be direct access off the 405 into the rent-a-car facility, so taking all of those cars and vehicles off the road, and it's 40% of the vehicle equivalents will be removed from coming into LAX because the rent-a-car buses will no longer be operating. Everyone will be able to get to the airport and to the rent-a-car facility and other parking facilities by our APM system. Earlier this year, that was our other major development project accomplishment, really the backbone of the future of improving transportation at the airport, and that was to award the contract, also a P3, so a long-term relationship, public-private partnership, where we and the developer community have skin in the game for this project to be built well, to be built considerately for the impacts from construction, but also to operate well with certainty, reliability, and other values, which again, I don't want to take over the mic, but these values and what we're doing are so important today and are part of what is exciting about working at an organization like LAWA in today's time. So the LAMP program is a major element. I think it's probably the biggest game changer for the future of LAX. While it is planned to be done in 2023, I view it as important as when the last Olympics were here in the 80s and the roadways were expanded, right? I mean, that was such a symbolic change. Everyone talks about Los Angeles Mayor Bradley at the time and moving that forward. You have seen, as you've driven around the airport, you might have seen a new additional roof line parallel to the Tom Bradley International Terminal. That's our midfield satellite concourse. It's a beautiful architectural building. It is essentially part of Bradley. It's what we will call it Bradley West Gates, because when you're in the building and using it, it's going to feel very seamless and harmonious. But from the exterior, that roof line tells a story of the waves that are coming in from the Pacific Ocean and then ultimately cresting to the roof line of the Bradley International Terminal. So it's beautiful aesthetically, and it's going to mean a lot for us trying to continue to solve the problem of planes that are circling and not having a gate to land, or spending time sitting out on the tarmac, which maybe isn't so beautiful for many guests that land or are awaiting a gate today. those are the major elements within the terminals. You're probably excited. Chick-fil-A opened up last week. Trejo's Tacos opened up last week. We continue to offer an incredible new array of restaurants, retail services, amenities, and just beautification of the experience when you're inside the terminals. And we're doing much of that work with our airline partners around the airport.
Excellent. Now there's more delicious places to go while I'm there. And I have to say, I do enjoy flying out through Thomas Bradley because, as you said, architecturally, it's very beautiful space where I've seen most of LAX's art collection as well. And there's just kind of this sense of ease and kind of really, for me as a traveler, that can be, I mean, for us all, I'm sure it can be very stressful. But there is something about being in that space where it seems to take in the whole person, the whole traveler. So,
I have a question. Because I think a lot, because I'm at the airport quite a bit, and I think a lot.
In more ways than one.
In more than one.
Your work is at the airport too.
Yeah. And I think I'm also really excited by airports and the potential of airports and the potential of travel and all the things that are offered. And I have to say, LAX is one of the hardest airports that I go through. So I'm really happy to hear that you're bringing in architects, because right now, one of the questions is there's such an amazing community of architects who are very visionary, I think, in Los Angeles. And so I have two questions. The first is sort of how engaged are you with the architectural community to really re-envision this whole new? And then the second question I have is in regards to the art program that has existed at LAX for a while, that I believe is run through the city of LA. And I'm wondering, is that still the case, or have you considered having a new independent outfit that would maybe move a little more quickly than sort of city, to still continue the city program, but to be as aggressive as your construction schedule and maybe think more expansively in terms of bringing the arts into that?
Sure. So I'm gonna ask you to expound on it, because one of the reasons I love panels is because I don't come here with all of the answers. This is about getting the minds and the thoughts and thought leaders that are here on this stage today and also in this audience. So I hear you going somewhere with that, and I'd love to hear more about your thoughts about it. The first part on architecture. I mean, we have such a strong history here of architecture beyond just the Bradley terminal, but to our theme building, and just if you study the architecture of LAX, it's these what ends up in today's time being very difficult to navigate, but at the time before jet aviation evolved to the way it has, these individual jewels that make a necklace. Well, unfortunately, that necklace is really too tight for the neck. But that was the design theme at the time from the architects. One of the things that's really important to us is, and to the mayor and to the board, and because of the work we do with our neighbors, Mayor Boyles, he impresses this upon us and in our conversations, which is, look, it's the airport is a global connector, but what's most important here is for the economic and social responsibility benefits to be felt here locally. And for the airport, like I said, when I landed in Schiphol, there was such a sense of place there. So when you land in Los Angeles and in this region, how does that airport, that experience reflect it, right? How does it create something new and something special, and where you are because of that, and not because of the traffic of Los Angeles, but the beauty of Los Angeles. So we, in all of our procurement processes, we always are looking to provide additional points and incentive for local firms, small firms, women-owned businesses to be part of the process. In the two projects that I just mentioned, the CONRAC and the APM, we didn't just require the project's developers to meet a minimum percentage. We actually put points, significant points, towards how they would show up and do better than what we even thought was possible, both for local workforce as well as for women, disadvantaged, and local and small businesses. Because we know local and small businesses fuel this incredible region. And I knew that the private industry would come back with some pretty impressive approaches, again, that we as government, public sector wouldn't have, but I was blown away by what they were able to do. The consolidated rent-a-car facility is going to be 50% locally designed here. 50%. I mean, and they have skin in the game. These aren't just promises, because they are now financially committed to making those commitments real, whether it's sustainability or whether it's the local participation. I would love to hear more about your thoughts on how to continue to bring a different lens of architecture and architectural relationships. We think we're doing great, but I'm sure there's more ways and newer creative ways that we should approach it as well.
I have many ideas. But it is, in terms of just talking about architectural history at this moment right now in Los Angeles, it's so exciting because, you know, you're talking about this huge shift with being able to have new kind of construction that hasn't been around since the 80s. There's this huge explosion in terms of architecture, and really cutting edge people have come to LA specifically because there's space and there's opportunity. So it's like, I mean, even downtown, it's interesting, I don't recognize it anymore, right? Mm-hmm. That even just the landscape and the cityscape of downtown has shifted. Anyway, it's just in terms of that, I'm glad to hear that you guys are thinking about really bringing in that energy and that voice, because that's also how to, I think, help bring LAX up a notch or two.
Yeah, and actually, I'd like to follow up to that question, Zoe, because Los Angeles is such a wonder. It's a creative capital, and according to the most recent Otis report, they release a creative economy report each year. 1 in 6 are creatives, but there's also this challenge of where do we house all the creatives? Where do they have space to work? How do we help decrease the number of cars on the road and make it easier for them to get from job to job? So I'm just wondering how could artists, innovators, and businesses around, in these areas, what are some great ways that could work, that we could all work together to ensure that it is still possible to keep creatives in Los Angeles and to also keep them coming here for work?
Funding.
Ooh.
Can I touch on that one?
Yeah, take it, Drew.
Well, I think, I don't have the answer of what we can do. I do have an opinion on what we shouldn't do, which is that we shouldn't mandate housing requirements from Sacramento. And I don't think I'm the only one at the council that feels that way. We should instead create incentives for people to embrace. I totally agree. I mean, depends, I suppose, on how you define creativity. I mean, I look at what I do every day as a creative venture in nature because I'm looking for opportunities, reinventing companies. Companies that I work with are reinventing brands, brand identities, the way in which we reach the consumer market, all that is of artistic nature. So business has always been interwoven, engineering, technology, artistry, it's all connected. It's a matter of, though, I think finding a way, like in our city, for example, if Metro or Sacramento is trying to mandate a housing requirement on us, that might not work for our city. Our city, it's very important for us to maintain the culture, the heritage of the city. So we are artistic. We always have been, but in a different way. We've always had manufacturing. We've always had fabricating. We've built and created satellite, GPS, all invented in El Segundo, which Sarah can attest to. I mean, this is the hub of aerospace. But we also need to maintain who we are as a city. And when we talk about developing in certain areas of the city, it has to be on our terms. And for a city like us, more than 95% of our revenue comes from commerce, not residential property tax. That's very unique to El Segundo. So it's important to us that we continue to ensure that the business community thrives, that we support artists because we know that they're essential to part of that formula. But we do it with incentives for creating the right opportunities. Maybe they're micro condos or other smaller footprint housing that's coming up. 3D printing housing is a new trend right now that's got a lot of viability to it, and in terms of decreasing housing costs. So I think it's looking at how can we provide the right incentives for cities to develop that housing, because one of the other things we hear is, I'm third generation, second generation El Segundo. My kids can't afford to live here. I have 5 kids. My 29 and 30-year-old, I just feel fortunate that they have jobs that pay well enough that they can afford a tiny little studio apartment about this big here in town. So we have to balance that, but I think it's through incentives and allowing the cities to have that independence and creativity of their own to address that. That's my thought.
Can I jump into this part of the conversation? Because in doing my research for this exhibition, especially looking at the background of John DeVola's work, these pictures were shot in 1975 because of the noise abatement zone. The housing had been condemned and the people had been paid a fair price for their houses. And actually, some of them actually moved the houses, but most of them moved someplace else, got torn down, and became this noise abatement zone. But what was interesting was that housing was built right after the war. All of it was built in 1946 precisely to provide housing that working class people could live in. And it was subsidized. The city of Los Angeles subsidized the developers to build that housing and to make it at a price that people, because the whole aerospace industry, as you've been talking about, was about to boom here, and they knew they needed working class people to do it. But the other side of this story is that the reason that land was all available adjacent to LAX as it existed then was, as far as I can see, 2,800 Japanese lived in that area, and they all had been sent to the camps during the war, and the land was vacated. So there's I guess part of the question I have is, how does all this work? But a part of it too is that on the one hand, the city provided for and had the foresight to have working class housing so that people of different classes could live in the city and make the economy go, was good. But it was all done. It was made possible by something that was not so good and that was actually very questionable as in a democratic society. So I think this kind of mix, this two-sidedness to any kind of expansion or need to upgrade a city exists, and whether there are issues of that kind that now are pertaining to who can come to El Segundo, or who is going to have access to the airport and who's going to be able to work there and live someplace that's not a 3-hour drive away.
I'm also going to jump in here and add a different perspective, because I think things get a little complicated when they just become about the market. And I think when you're talking about artistic endeavors, and I understand the creative economy, and that's what you're talking about, but I also think it's important to understand that certain amount of artistic practices are not necessarily market-driven. You need to have some space that isn't simply about how to be entrepreneurial in terms of the creative process, because the creative process is not something I think that should be complete. I understand there's a place for the market in terms of the art world, but I also think that there are the majority of artists don't make a living, right? And a majority of artists, if you really want to get serious about people who are struggling, actors, I mean, that's this whole cadre of people. I do understand that you don't want to necessarily have to be beholden to larger expectations of housing for people who maybe don't have the same ability to earn. But maybe let's take the entrepreneurial spirit in a different way, like actually paying artists properly, or with the LAX to have actual funding for the arts. I do think that what they have in LA, I do know as part of a new building, it's required that a certain amount of money goes towards artistic, to bringing in things in libraries and police stations. I was on some committees for these things. So I feel like that might be a more useful approach, and to try to actually get some money to these people if we're not going to be providing housing. Part of the reason I had to go to New York, believe it or not, is it's cheaper for me to live in New York than it is for me to live in LA anymore as an artist, which is wild. Also, for my child, I didn't want to have to pay an incredible amount of money I don't have for a private school. He's going to an excellent public school in Brooklyn that I could never afford here. So, I just want to make it clear, like, it's not everybody can earn the level that's necessary who are very professionally successful artists. It's a very real problem. But maybe also to present something like in Holland, where artists are really respected and given, not given for free. I mean, I'm just saying they're given more opportunity to earn, mainly through, like Schiphol is an incredible airport. It is designed beautifully. Like your experience of entering that was entirely scripted and paid for very, very well. Artists in Holland have cards that actually say, like, we are professional artists. It's actually, they're given, I mean, this is a whole longer conversation, but I do feel like there's not enough government funding for the arts, and I don't mean to get into kind of the 80s culture wars, but I do think in situations like construction and at LAX and really engaging, like, you could get all of those ugly things that are on the outside, get artists, commission artists, and pay them properly to create something new as a sort of landscape engagement at the airport. I want to make clear that it's not so easy. You can think entrepreneurially, but in certain things like the art world, it's not just about money. It's not based on a business context. I would never have made this work if, I'd been thinking in my 20s about the reality of being a professional. So I just want to kind of allow that in there for you to consider, that sometimes the market shouldn't drive. I don't think the market should drive everything.
Yeah, we're really happy about our public art policy. You mentioned it.
Yep.
Thank you. You might have been serving on some commissions
For
again, that helped to
nothing.
influence that.
Paid nothing to do it.
Well, that's like most commissions.
That's another problem.
And actually, our president, Sean Burton, was going to be here today, another public servant. He has his own full-time job and then also, serves on these commissions for free. So for everyone that's on commissions throughout the city, the region, or the country, thank you, because it's true and important service. But we also in the city of Los Angeles have a public works policy that is 1% of all the construction dollars, but it's a huge amount of money, right? Because we're doing billions of dollars worth of work, and so it allows for a couple things. And so this is how we've been viewing it recently, which is, yes, you mentioned Tom Bradley International Terminal has some incredible permanent pieces of art that are integrated into the facility, and that's wonderful. Airports, the best airports around the world, all realize that an art program is such an indelible part of the experience. It's not just a good thing to do. It creates a passenger experience where people are more comfortable, more relaxed, and so that automatically decreases the level of tension and anxiety that comes with traveling in aviation today, and that's critically important. But we've also, I just want to comment really quickly on how we're morphing, because I'd love to hear the comments, but we're also putting more resources into the flexibility of programs in the future. So we're not just putting everything into hard infrastructure, but actually having rotating art exhibit programs. Zoe, one of your pieces has been on display as part of a rotating exhibit. Yeah. And then also now I'm excited about the performing arts programs as part of this. So we have relationships with grand performances, and we're going to have dance performances in the future to just really, in this world, that the future is changing so fast. It's like, how do you future-proof? Well, you provide all the opportunities to remain flexible, right, in everything, in our design, but also in the commitment of what we're doing with our art funding.
And I also think that art brings a certain amount of currency, like that to the experience, and it brings, Los Angeles as this huge place of creative, of creation and all these creatives to not have that reflected is a big miss. I'm going to say one more quick thing, but I understand also this question of funding. I really think it should come from also successful private industries, and it can be a small percentage. Like, I wonder if there's a task force to help try to bring in companies to just give a tiny percentage towards the arts and to start that kind of conversation. Or like with what you're doing, there's a lot of amazing places on the East Coast that are more think tanks, but they bring together scientists and artists and then get funded in order to realize something. But I feel like it shouldn't just be on the government to do. I think that this funding for the arts should start happening more aggressively at the corporate level in these kind of activations in the airport or in housing, or, I don't know if this is even discussed at all in your world.
Yeah, I think to your point, creating a very personalized travel experience involves a lot of people because, especially in LAX, we have a huge international population. And so to understand an experience, you can't just draw from the government who's running LAX. I think you bring in a team of engineers, artists, government and private funding, or those kind of companies, to create an experience that is not one-track minded, because that's ultimately what you do, or sorry, what we're striving for there. And I think that beyond, for art, we think a lot about installations in airports, and so that's what you're seeing when you're moving. But a lot of companies that we're seeing these days are focusing on the beautification of mobility itself, and so that can be not necessarily creating beautiful terminals, but creating beautiful vestibules that will take you to your terminal. And
yeah. And I imagine then there are designers or people with artistic or even graphic design backgrounds who are working on your team.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm very curious to know, like, and how especially in an institution like Starburst Accelerator sees those connections between a personalized travel experience that is safer, more comfortable, gets you where you need to go faster, and also the idea that you enjoy the experience while you're getting there. And CEO Flay, I just want to say, I did not know about the Grand Performances connection. That's really exciting, because I think and that I wanted to touch on that you had mentioned, not just that when visitors are coming into Los Angeles and they really see the creativity and they can feel that, but I think also honoring that you are in this new and different space. And I think art can teach us so much about empathy and about how we communicate these things to each other, and with respect to the diverse populations and cities that are, inside LA County. It's pretty phenomenal. Sarah, maybe to come back to you, how does, so in your, maybe it's just best to speak to your institution, but how are how are the arts integrated into either your programming or into recruiting people to come through this the aerospace, through your incubator program?
Yeah, exactly. So what we're seeing these days is a lot of airlines are interested, they have their own private venture funds that invest in the passenger experience. So a lot of those are apps for booking your hotel through the same way you would book your airline ticket, and integrating the entire experience together. Because the way we view travel now is we take a separate transportation to the airport, and then we get there and we book it through a separate airline, and then we book a separate hotel. So a lot of what companies are focusing on these days, and through the arts, are focusing on the holistic experience. When you take a top-up approach, or a top-down approach, then you can see that everything is very segmented, and a lot of companies now are focusing on a holistic experience where you don't feel like there's a huge disconnect in between every transition period.
You don't have to have 20 apps for one journey,
Exactly,
right?
yes.
All one personalized experience.
Oh, no, that's interesting. This was not a question, but I'm like, all of a sudden, if we were maybe more coffee hour, I'd be like, what's your favorite app to use to get to the airport?
I do.
Do you have?
No, I don't have. I will say, though, that I'm glad you're thinking about. I'm glad that there is this question about the entire process of going to the airport. So just to give some context of what you're seeing on the walls here. This actually came out of my attempt to understand LAX as a part of a way to understand Los Angeles. And so it was this huge, giant behemoth of a place to try to navigate. And so I just decided, instead of being frightened of it, I was going to go all the way in and completely commit myself to understanding the area around LAX, which at the time, when you got past the 405 into Inglewood, it was really no man's land there was really no discussion. And it's a huge amount of space. And so I wanted, and I also very much love hotels. I love this notion of going to hotels, getting lost in hotels. I find these sort of interstitial interstitial space is very liberating. Now, I know not everybody does, but the sort of potential, and then there are just so many of them. And so the project is basically mapping every single hotel and motel along Century Boulevard from the airport to what used to be the racetrack. Now is this sort of a casino situation, which also has a really interesting art collection. And I would photograph through each room, through the windows of the planes coming into land. And it comes out of a historical kind of photography called the New Topographics. And some really famous artists from LA, Ed Ruscha, Kathy Opie, people who were this notion of mapping or documenting a space. And so I was interested in documenting this area around the airport. But part of it was just feeling so isolated in the process of trying to get to the airport. And then truly, I was even on the tarmac last night waiting because there was nowhere to park. I had to get on that Hertz shuttle. I was completely dislocated. And I even know the area and the airport so well. But it's nice to think about. I didn't realize that there was this sort of active involvement of thinking about the entire process of the travel, which I think will help make this navigation and this transition into Los Angeles a lot less abrasive and difficult. And I think, I mean, I don't know if other people have the same feeling of kind of dislocation when they arrive into LA, but as a city without a center, right? They talk about Paris as a sort of 19th century city, New York as the 20th century city, and Los Angeles as this 21st century city, which is very nodal, right? The downtown is now becoming much more of a sort of destination point, but I feel like before that transition was happening, it's like, how do you navigate this place? And that dislocation, I think, is at the very core of how Los Angeles feels.
Downtown is also starting to, I feel like, to have more New York-style elements, which is very interesting. And I feel like that could be another conversation, because I think one of the beauties of living on the West Coast is just how diverse our landscape is. And personally, I would love to be able to see mountains and not maybe so much of a skyscraper. But actually, and speaking of your work, Zoe, and I know that these works were taken along Century Boulevard. So there's actually part of the plan now is Century Boulevard will, of course, change and evolve through several construction projects.
It already has.
Yeah, it already has, right? So I was curious, do you feel that the work has changed in any way, or would you now go back and want to do a part two?
I can't believe I did the part one. I mean, I stayed in some really sketchy places that I wouldn't do now. What's interesting is that the work has become, I think I mentioned this earlier, that the work has taken on a historical bent, which I was not anticipating at the time of photographing it, insofar that a lot of the hotels and motels are no longer there, or they've become other hotels, or the parts, particularly in Inglewood, a lot of those locations, they're just not the same kind of view or vision anymore. It's also interesting because I shot these before Instagram, and a lot of the kind of style that I used to use was this kind of, it looks like a casual snapshot, this sort of 70s aesthetic of the color, this kind of hint towards nostalgia, this unable to place in time. And at the time, this was not very common, and now it looks like everything was shot with an Instagram sort of filter. And so in some ways, it's been interesting to see how the work still holds because it's become identifiable through this other lens. I still do a lot of work about exploring and conceptually mapping Los Angeles. It's just taking different forms. So I did this whole series where I mapped sites of disappearance along the Pacific, and I've been bronzing palm fronds, right? Because all the palm trees are dying because they're just old and they're not native. And so the city of Los Angeles made a decision to let them die, and they're going to be replaced with live oaks, which is great because they provide shade, they don't take up so much water, they're native, but it's also going to completely change the skyline of Los Angeles. Now, Beverly Hills and the private cities are keeping palm trees, and they're going crazy because it costs $20,000 a pop to replace these palm trees. But I've been basically mapping the disappearing palm tree, getting fronds from all over the city, and then bronzing them into these sort of crazy, beautiful forms. So the interest in this conceptually mapping the imaginary of Los Angeles, or the disappearing Los Angeles, or the being remade Los Angeles, that's still consistent in my practice. But I am very happy that this work still holds and that people still look to the work. And it's interesting because people come to the work very differently. Some people are very dark about it, and some people are very celebratory about it. People have very particular favorites. And I think there's a lot of, my hope is to have sort of a projection. You can have the narrative inside the room, and then you have the narrative outside the room. And this notion of coming to Los Angeles as a place of escape or as promise, very sort of Day of the Locust. But would I do this again? No.
Thank you. And Colin.
Let me jump in for a second. Zoe and I at one point had a really crucial disagreement about what the meaning of this work is. I mean, I have two answers to that. One is that whatever the artist feels about the work and whatever they articulate about the work is absolutely true for them. The observer is something different, and my favorite sort of shibboleth for this is something that D.H. Lawrence once said, which is, never trust the teller, trust the tale. But indeed, part of the power of art is that once the artist creates it and gets it out there, whatever their personal interpretation or their personal experience in making it is implicit in it, but also it's open to whatever the public thinks of it and in whatever way that it grows. And that's part of the power of art, is that it is by nature ambiguous. That's what art does. It preserves the thing that science wants to eliminate. Art is about how two things that are completely contradictory and incompatible can actually be true at the same time, because that's the way actually most of us experience human nature and living in the world. And so even though Zoe and I clashed at one moment, I think that that's part of the process, and that kind of difference of interpretation that's possible in really worthwhile art is the real key to why it's worthwhile.
I'm going to stay quiet.
Well, Colin, and I was going to ask if in designing, while this this experience has been up for several months now, and I was wondering if there were new insights that you had gleaned, and I know you did a very thorough research before putting the show together, but, and especially as, we are thinking about today as LAX as subject, LAX as inspiration, LAX as innovation, LAX as this thing that brings us all together today. I was just, wondering, has this experience changed for you?
Well, one of the ways that I think an exhibition like this can change the view that one has of an airport is that, in general, it seems to me that the experience you are going through is the one that most of us think of airports. Airports are about the future. They're about what's next. And if we're not happy with them now, what we think about is not what went wrong before, but what are we going to do to fix it, to make it bigger, to make it more accessible, to make it better. Art is usually about thinking about the past and what was the reality, what was the complexity of the historical situation in which it was made. And so I think that art, especially art that's related to an airport, which most people think of in this futuristic way, these pictures that Deborah made when the houses they'd been left for over 2 years after the people had moved out and so forth, before they were torn down. And so they were getting broken into. People were stealing copper pipe the way they do today out of a housing plot. And indeed, John himself broke into some of these houses because the police were not protecting them, nothing was going on. Some of the labels for these have the notation FE in them, and FE means forced entry, that he's the one who broke into the house that time. And on the back wall are photographs that he took the next year, 1976, where you see the house still sitting on the left in color, and on the right you see that it's gone. Because as they were removing the houses, a few of the houses actually got towed to new sites. The owners were allowed to have it paid for them to take the house off of its foundation. And usually the foundation, again, this was worker housing. Most of these didn't have basements. They were built on concrete platforms. So some of the houses survived and many of them didn't. But it's the whole thing is itself a kind of evaluation of history, an attempt to understand what's happened and what the benefits and the minuses were of the whole social situation that they represent. And the same is true, I think, of the photographs. I think Zoe's photographs are powerful precisely because they're ambiguous, and she and I can have a big argument about them and both come away feeling satisfied.
But I think also too that as we've had as myself and my colleagues have had the privilege of working with this experience for the past few months, we've met so many people, visitors who have come in, who do remember these homes that were there, whether because they had family that lived there, or friends, or in some cases they were that teenager that broke in, and I was like, that's interesting. And it's. And these are also to recall too, if we look at the map back here, we can see where John and Zoe are working. Zoe's in the orange and John is in the blue. And then it's kind of hard to see, but then we've got ESMoA all the way down here. So, and thinking about where we are, that we are in El Segundo, and I want to go a little bit deeper into this. And Colin, could you speak a little about why you wanted to bring the show here?
Well, again, because as I say, at one of the opening events, I was up on the roof, and that really graphically made me realize something I sort of knew that LAX was nearby, but how close it really is. Mm-hmm. And indeed that you have a view, if you get up any place high in the city, you have a view of it. And so that was part of it. But the other thing was that when I discovered Zoe's work is when I had, I had thought, well, maybe John's work would be of interest, but I felt that some kind of, I like an exhibition that has some kind of dialogue in it, where there's a dialectic between one way of approaching a subject and another one, especially if it's historically displaced. Mm-hmm. So once I had both of them, I wanted to emphasize the difference, the fact, as I say, that Zoe was born the year John did this. This installation, I should mention, of John's work, as you'll notice, it's very uneven. Most art exhibitions, like the one that I did, again, this was my idea of how to display the work, but most of them have a kind of symmetry on the wall. This is very stop-start. There are places where there are double hangings, but one of the pictures missing. There's funny spacing between them. This was, I asked John to send me a view of this exhibition the first time he ever installed it, which was at the end of the year that it was made. And what I have done there is to recreate the way he installed it in 1975.
That's very exciting. And there is something that's also been pointed out to me by most school children. When we've been looking at these works and talking about them in relationship, they've noted something very interesting. In John's photographs, there aren't pictures of airplanes, but in Zoe's work, there are lots of pictures of airplanes, which does inspire a lot of discussion about, why those things are there, why they might be missing, what is the artist really interested in showing us. And also, too, just thinking about the future of aerospace, I had another visitor who was here, considerably older, but remembered when LAX was Mines Field. And as a small boy, he remembered seeing planes there for the air shows, which I found really exciting. But he also remembers when this was still lima bean fields, when these were still farm fields. And he wanted to know, and maybe Sarah, you can speak to this too, he's like, what do you think kids get so excited about airplanes for? And he also wanted reassurance that kids still get excited about airplanes and aerospace. And Sarah, maybe you can speak a little bit to this. So what is it about El Segundo and aerospace? Why is that such a and we know historically why that has been, but going into the future, what makes that a happy relationship?
Right, I think that El Segundo in particular is a great place to be if you're a young startup, because the old guard has planted roots here. We still have Boeing and Lockheed and Northrop and Raytheon. Everybody's down here still. And within the aerospace industry, within aerospace startups, what you want to do is partner with those large corporates. They're seeking investment. They want to know not who is building a new technology that they can't build, but who is stealthy and scrappy enough to productize faster than they can. So what's really interesting in the aerospace industry is there's a lot of collaboration rather than competition between large corporates and startups, because a lot of startups outside of the aerospace industry will try and overcome some of the corporates and be sexier than they are. You know, that's what they're striving for. But whereas in the aerospace industry, you can license your technology, you can do those kinds of things to improve the overall system. So yeah.
And Drew, I'll ask you kind of the same question. Like, what makes that a happy relationship? And how do we know these relationships are successful? And are there lessons that we can learn from that we can also apply to our relationship to other places of industry like LAX?
Well, I look at Starburst. Starburst is probably, to your point earlier about P3, Starburst is probably the best example of private-public partnership at its infancy in El Segundo. And I'll go back to when I was chair of economic development, and a good friend of mine, Ben Marcus, who founded AirMap, which is defining the airspace for drones. You're probably aware of them. Ben said there's this cool company out of Paris that's they're doing a dog and pony show in LA, and they're looking at different places to locate their facility. We had them in one meeting with the El Segundo Economic Development Advisory Council. Richard Lundquist, here's their pitch. I'll give you free space here. And I think for Starburst, it was a no-brainer. To your point, all the major aerospace companies are here. El Segundo is in the process of being reinvented from a commercial sector standpoint. If you look around, the Northrop line is being redeveloped right now by Hackman Capital out of Santa Monica. That's going to be certainly creative space, maybe a studio. It's the same firm that built the Amazon studio in Culver City, by the way. So El Segundo is being reinvented all around us, and I think Starburst is in a perfect place. They realize that. We also have more PhDs per capita, arguably, than any other part of the United States. I threw around a quote once of 1,200 PhDs every day in town, and Wanda Austin, who, by the way, just took over as interim president of USC, thank goodness, right the ship a little bit. But she also was the CEO of Aerospace Corp, and she quickly corrected me, no, we have over 1,000 PhDs in Aerospace Corp alone. Your math is way off. So we're a powerhouse of intellect in El Segundo. I don't think we've been regarded that way for a long time, but we absolutely are. And so it's absolutely makes sense for a company like Starburst that's looking for the best and brightest minds to be here in town.
Let me ask you a question about the business world and the way it works. All of these companies we're talking about, Boeing, for instance, started very small. I mean, Boeing was a person, and then there were a few other people that came in and so forth. And I would think that the behemoths of the airline industry today do look to new startups, because often what happens is they get so big that even though there are very smart people inside, it's hard for them to really generate an off-the-books idea. And so it's very important to have these startups that seem kind of scrappy at first sometimes, because they're the ones that are going to do what the airline industry always has to do, which is to look to the future.
Perfect example, just within the last month, Boeing bought Millennium Space Systems. Satellite builder right here in El Segundo. I toured their facility a few years ago. That's a perfect example. To Sarah's point earlier, they can't do R&T quickly enough. They are large, they're slower, they're not as scrappy and nimble as small companies can be. So makes sense, yeah.
And within government, if I could just comment, and within government, those partnerships are the same. Drew and I have talked about this before. It's just, how do we continue to reinvent government and modernize government and become more efficient, more effective? And so for the airport, like I said, with all of the infrastructure we're building, we have to make sure we're future-proofing it. And yes, we have amazing people, but we look to partnerships outside of our traditional space. Even in the airport industry across the world, we're all partnering in new and different ways to try to get those best ideas and to continue to evolve and transform.
Right, and it's not just the airports. There are how many, I tried to find this, like how many different city agencies alone are operating in the airport, alone businesses. It is quite broad and expansive, and you could write a PhD thesis on it for sure. And CEO Flint, you've mentioned this, and Drew's also alluded to it as well. Would you tell us a little bit about P3?
Yeah, so the way that The P3s and infrastructure that we've done essentially involve a designer, a builder, a financier, an operator, and then a team that will maintain our facilities. And what we've done, for instance, with the train is we went through a very long process to select the right partner. We had a handful of teams that are used to and experienced in doing these major developments across the world. And I want to comment on a few elements of why I find it to be special. The procurement process was, again, based on, and our selection based on best value of price, of constructability, of schedule certainty, but many more elements. Sustainability, improving the environment, bringing more efficiency to their program, and then again the social values of local workforce hiring as well as local business inclusion. And they all competed amongst all of those paradigms, both from the economic to the social. The process with many attorneys and very strident rules allowed for us to interact with the development teams throughout the procurement so that we would continue to adjust what our parameters and requirements were in our program so that it was responsive and practical for the private sector to actually propose to us ultimately on. And I think that give and take, that dialogue, that communication, all within the boundaries because we have federal rules that we have to live under and procurement rules, and those were all, we manage those all responsibly. But the ability for us to dialogue in this way, which is how private sector does it, right? They don't just say, okay, go bid on this and come back to me in 60 days without getting any more information. There was a dialogue that allowed the process to be a very sophisticated one for something as complex as the projects we were undertaking. And so that part was very beneficial. But longer term is the proposal teams, the development teams that are going to be building these projects for us have some of their money invested, and they will receive annual payments based on their performance for the commitments that they made in the project. It's more than just a management contract. They are going to be committed to ensuring that the local hires that they committed through the next 30 years actually manifest themselves. So they have an interest then in working with us on programs with schools to make sure that the next generation of kids that are in high school today have an avenue to learn about the specialty, whether it's train systems operators, that there's training for the kids that are in school today to then be able to step into those jobs in the next 10 or 15 years. So there's this life cycle commitment that comes from these approaches that I'm really excited about in the P3s.
Excellent. What an amazing project. Zoe?
Oh, I just want to say, jumping back a little bit, just giving El Segundo some props for being so civically minded and for having ESMoA as one of the few places that can be nimble enough because you are this sort of Kunsthalle, which is a little bit of a different structure than the sort of serious museums that are like a little bit slower in its motions, or the galleries, which are completely market-driven, that there's this sort of wonderful in-between. And I think that El Segundo as a city had a part in supporting this space, if I remember correctly, with how this space started, was in conversation with the city. Am I correct, I think?
I'll clarify a little bit. Not financially, no.
Oh, I was thinking it was financially as well.
Former mayor, though there was a former mayor.
Okay, well, I do think...
Predecessor was involved, and I think was facilitating. But I'll give Brian and Ava Sweeney props. They're right here in the audience, second row. They are the benefactors. They are the reason we have this incredible
space,
museum. Yeah, so thank you to them.
Yeah. But in terms of civic engagement, my entire time in Los Angeles, this is the most civically engaged in a real way that I've had with the community at large and with the people who are sort of in charge of things. So just that it's very refreshing, and maybe this is just a result of the fact that El Segundo feels manageable scale-wise and is such a particular kind of identity, and this is such a particular exhibition and experience. But just well done in terms of the El
Quick
Segundos.
comment. So they were the catalyst for, I think, we've always had the Automobile Driving Museum. Carl Jacobson, former mayor, has been involved with that for many years. We've had other artistically minded venues in town.
Old Town Music Hall.
Old Town, thank you.
And historically, Smoky Hollow has also been affordable studio and housing for artists. Back in the 1950s, Richard Sarr, many of you might be familiar with his wife or daughter, Betty Sarr and Allison Sarr, but he and his brother kept a ceramic studio back here. But as his family grew, unfortunately, he had to leave and set up shop as a conservator at LACMA, actually. But there is a very rich, arts and cultural history.
I would just argue, though, I think that ESMoA was not argue, I would absolutely agree with what you have to say. ESMoA was the first, really, I believe, to get on the map and really put El Segundo on the map from an artistic standpoint within the artists. I mean, they have an exchange program with the Getty, and there's incredible things going on by way of this museum that have not been possible in the past. So I remember harking back to the first VIP night you had here on a Friday night. Not the first, but one of the graffiti one, which was incredible, wall-to-ceiling graffiti. There were people from all over LA and other parts of Southern Cal and probably beyond that had never even been to El Segundo, had no idea where it was.
But they knew the song.
They knew the song,
Yes.
exactly. And they thought we were Inland Empire or something. Who knows? But so thank you.
Yeah, I had never been to El Segundo before.
But you knew the song, right?
I left my wallet.
Yeah, I
of
left my
course.
wallet in El Segundo.
But just that you guys have been, I hope you keep supporting them more actively.
Be careful, because third time's a charm. If you're here 3 times for more than 24 hours any given time, you will be moving here. It just happens, I'm telling you.
It's true. It's true. I got the signal that we have about 5 minutes left. So actually, maybe what might be a good idea, because we want to leave time for Q&A, is to ask our wonderful panel to share some closing thoughts, or maybe hopes or wishes for the future.
I'll start. I'll keep it brief. I just want to say it's great to sit next to CEO Deborah Flint. As I mentioned, we've had a great dialogue already. We're really cautiously optimistic about our future. We are, we're kind of, on one hand, we're the beneficiary. On the other hand, casualty is too strong of a word. But, we certainly feel the effects of LAX from a traffic, air quality, noise standpoint. We continue to be concerned. There's 60 to 70 years of collective experience with these two gentlemen in fighting the good fight and protecting El Segundo's interests right in the front row. So I just say that to suggest that we've already had some very healthy conversations. I'm thankful that I don't have a black eye. Last time I was in front of the Board of Airport Commissioners, I had a black eye from a surf trip down in deep Mexico, and I was like, man, we better take this guy seriously. I think I'm going to use that again. Anyway, Deborah talked about 85 million, or I think somebody else, and we've seen reports of 112, 114 million through the Southern California Association of Governments in terms of forecasted million annual passengers. And of course, we get alarmed. There's only so much space, and we need to do everything we can to protect our interests as a city, knowing that this thing is a reason, this thing, the airport, is a reason that people love to be here as well. We are the home of bioscience, 2 major bioscience companies. Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, the wealthiest Angelino, has bought 10, 12 properties. He brought the Times here. He's part owner in the Lakers. We're the professional sports headquarters. A lot of those things are a result of having aerospace, incredible transportation right in our backyard. So it's a balance, and we're working together to ensure that we continue to protect our town. And we hope to bring more art. I mean, Bernard, Ava's brother, had this crazy idea. It's a great idea. I think it's not even crazy, but imagine if on a descent, on approach, you could see this crazy art field on the roofs in El Segundo and Westchester, and how amazing that would be. So I think the possibilities are endless. Thank you for having me.
That's a beautiful way to end, Mayor. The possibilities are endless, and we're so fortunate. I have peers, and I have watched in my career cities and regions been devastated when they've lost their air service. Jobs by the thousands are cut, and terminals are mothballed, and the city's economy plummets, and it's very real. I've seen people suffer time and time again when that happens. We are fortunate on the other end of the spectrum to be in a region that's just so thriving, and is so strong and has so much promise because we're future focused, because the industries of the past have continued to evolve and to grow and to build, and that's incredible. This region, I believe, is the third largest economy in the world. I mean, it's just incredible. But at the same time, we have to manage that in a way that is responsible. And it's not easy. I think the mayor and I know that. The technology is going to solve a lot of things. There are many things. The investments in the infrastructure that we're making, indeed will solve traffic. But the region is going to continue to grow. So we have to solve traffic, beyond the footprint that I get the opportunity to lead. We have to be holistic with that. We have to continue to drive technology to make the experience better, to make sure that our airport and the surrounding communities are safe, that we drive, whether it's biofuels and aircraft, continue to make the air cleaner. And again, ensuring that because it is the people, it's the neighbors around the airport that feel the airport so acutely, that the benefits of having a major global gateway are also felt here through the local business inclusion, through the jobs that will continue to be created here, and that those jobs are good jobs. We have a lot of social issues in this country today about jobs and the ability for people to be able to provide and take care for themselves, no matter what economic strata, and ensuring that we have high quality, accessible jobs at every income strata at the airport is something that we take seriously, and it's part of both my Board of Airport Commissioner, who is appointed by the mayor, and the mayor's relationship together across this region. I'm optimistic that we can work through and continue to make progress against the challenges, but to yield better and more impressive results. And I do believe that children today are still in awe and love aviation and aircraft, and when they see the marvel of a plane taking off, which it still is like, how does that happen, right? We know how it happens, but it still is something incredulous for humans to have flight, and then to be connected globally. It's still very, very special, and I think will continue to attract the awe and admiration, and that will turn into our future aviators for years to come.
Yeah, I think to your point, technology will solve a lot of problems, but there's going to be a lot of weird technology coming down the pipeline, is what we see. Basically, Uber Elevate is launching here in 2023, hopefully, which means flying cars everywhere. There's electrification of planes, there's supersonic planes, there's rocket travel from here to China. There's going to be a lot of weird technology, and not all of it's going to work. So I think the idea, especially as locals to the airport, is to keep an open mind about it, but also to be a megaphone for what's important as locals. Obviously, emissions is really important, so if we can amplify the voice to say we really need to push these electric aircrafts. There are a few in Los Angeles actually who are working on outfitting planes with electric engines, or we need to focus on the noise. The noise is just too much. There are a lot of companies who are focusing on minimizing the noise, and even with supersonic travel coming down the pipeline, we want to prioritize that. So I think that as El Segundo residents, it's important to kind of have a really loud voice because LAX is going to be a hub for all of this innovation, and with El Segundo, even if you think about drones and whatnot, I mean, the list is endless. So to, like I said, just emphasize that we still are a community here and that we want to have those.
Okay, let me close by trying to put this exhibition into a slightly larger context of art exhibitions and the way they work. One way that an art exhibition can work is by being a seamless view of the continuity of something. There's a terrific photographic show at the Getty right now about the history of fashion photography from 1911 to 2011. That's an example of this kind of seamless show where you feel that there's just a kind of progression where one stage builds on the next and it all fits together. The other kind of show, and it usually is a smaller show like this one, is instead of being seamless in that way, is dialectical, where you walk in and you say, what the devil does that have to do with this? Where two works of art are so different that they comment on each other and make you try and imagine or to at least wonder about how history could have been here at one point and then been there, less than 25 or 30 years later. And this kind of show is the kind that I most enjoy doing. They're usually smaller shows than the kind of show I'm talking about at the Getty. I've done some of those huge shows, but this is the kind of show that I think is the most challenging and therefore the most useful and interesting to the public. But the two kinds are both necessary in order to give the history of art in any medium its fair due.
And it's also, I want to add to that, it's a big honor to show with John. I knew about this work. I'm familiar, I've seen the other things that he's done, and I'm a big fan. And even though there are a lot of differences, there's a lot of similarities, and that John and I, if you look at things like we're both dealing with inside and outside and kind of having these kinds of spaces simultaneous, we're both using the square format. We're both thinking about spaces of disappearance around Los Angeles and conceptually mapping Los Angeles that way. So what was striking to me were the similarities in the work, actually, even though on the surface they look so different. I'm going to leave with three hopes, actually. One is that with all of this wonderful, the success that's coming out of El Segundo in the area, that there is some serious consideration for funding for the arts that's going to happen privately and or publicly or in tandem. It doesn't take a lot. Funding for the arts is such a disaster in this country. It kills me. I think one tank pays for how many art education programs. That there is so much wealth. I hope it does get people to start thinking about art as like an R&D kind of thing. There is currency behind funding of the arts. And it'll also raise the level of how LAX is viewed by the rest of the world in terms of it being so much of a creative economy, to have that reflected in its infrastructure. The second thing that's connected to that is that I think it'd be amazing to have a task force around LAX that isn't just city-run, that is more nimble and is viewed as sort of a startup, and that could be a rotating curator every 2 or 3 years with a budget. Doesn't even have to be a big budget, and to think dynamically about the entire space of LAX and not thinking about the things that are being used for construction, right? The things that are covering up, or things that are, this notion of when you come into land and looking out, like there's a lot of potential to think about the art experience beyond the object, which you already are starting to do, but to think about it infrastructurally as well. And then I hope you run for mayor someday. I'm talking to you. I'd vote for you. Well, not clearly of El Segundo. But no, I'm very thankful that you're in charge. How about that?
Well, and I want to say that my hope is that officially that we will recognize art as part of STEAM, because we need art in order to continue our science and technology. We need all these things. They are not separate entities. They are many different parts of a whole that make the whole thing work. And I also hope that we will have many more conversations like this in the future. I'd like to give a warm congratulations to our panel for such a rich conversation today.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you for coming. And I think we have time for 2 questions from our audience today. Keep it to a minute.
I'll keep it to a minute. First, let me congratulate Deborah for something other than the private-public partnerships, and that has to do with the fact that she has reoriented the airlines themselves, and they're spending billions of dollars to improve the central terminal area. Just as an aside beyond that, though, that area that you've got here on the photos represented 4,300 homes in Westchester, which at the time were removed for noise abatement, and that was when the airport was only at 25 million annual passengers around. We know that LAX is never going to expand much beyond the footprint that you see because it's impractical. We don't have enough money in this whole country to do that. And so with that in mind, we know that it's getting even bigger. We know that we are going to have a lot more airplanes coming here still because we don't have the right to tell anyone not to come here. And so my question has to do with how in the world are we going to protect the people who live around the airport, because we are now seeing more and more aircraft taxiing around waiting for the gates, even though we have room to put in more gates. And even my organization, RSAC, which has a limitation on how big the number of gates can get, it's still capable of handling more. And so my question is, what can you do to reduce the impact on the communities around the airport?
I think we can continue to do so much, Denny and others, and I really love the fact that we have a technologist here, because I'm excited about the technology applications that can make the airport more efficient. There are solutions that can better schedule aircraft into gates and out of gates. It's not a simple solution at all. There are hundreds of aircraft on the ground, en route, on final approach at any 1 minute in time, and that all have to be orchestrated, and the first and foremost thing is they have to be orchestrated safely. But there is technology that can make that more efficient and effective to minimize the number of aircraft that are taxiing on the ground and waiting, and the delays that come along with that. And even if there are delays, be able to program the solutions to recover from those delays more efficiently and more effectively. I'm optimistic about those things happening both on the ground as well as in the sky. And there's no question, we have to, again, I cannot look to the past on this, but getting ahead and knowing what's coming, making sure we're building the right facilities to prepare for the future, whether it's in our, again, with our traffic, the roadways, the consolidated rent-a-car facility that we're building, future-proofing those so that they better manage the effects of the future and the growth, and so that we don't find ourselves in the level of congestion, whether it's vehicle congestion or aircraft congestion that we've had today.
I also would like to address that. Obviously, a huge buzzword these days is data science, but we already have existing technology on the ground, radars on the ground that are collecting data 24/7 about the flight paths of our planes and whatnot. So how serendipitous. Francois behind you, he actually owns a company, he happens to be one of our companies, who can turn that data into useful things. So if you think about how Southwest reinvented the turnaround time by cleaning out the cabin just 8 minutes faster, and they were able to get more planes in the air. You can do the same thing with data science at LAX. You can analyze how long the pushback time is, how long their aircrafts are taxiing for, to really optimize that. And so you can do that through already existing radar technology on the ground, collecting those data points, and then reorganizing from there.
Is there another question from the group?
Actually, I feel like I want to jam 10 questions in. Thank you for your time today. It was very interesting. I want to say from the perspective of being a pilot, it's really interesting to see this. My girlfriend and I had come in here last weekend, and I just thought it was pictures of hotel rooms until she pointed out there was an aircraft in every shot. I have to say the last 3 minutes on final approach and the outer marker all the way down to final is a pretty busy, dynamic, exciting environment, and you really don't have a lot of time to look out the window. And sometimes I always wonder if people are looking at us in the airplane. So it's
They're looking at you all the time.
Kind of interesting comment. LaGuardia and JFK have very interesting approach paths. Did you ever consider reshooting it?
I have an obsession with airplanes and airports, like I've said, but this project I was really thinking about specific to Los Angeles. But I do have a new project possibly I want to go to every single hotel in Manhattan. That's sort of just so I can learn Manhattan I learn it through its hotels. But there is that because my mother, by the way, was an airline stewardess. She was TWA in the 60s, met my dad in a flight. Yeah, going from Frankfurt to what was Idlewild way back in the day. And she used to be with the little pillbox hat, and they just reopened that hotel, that made it into a hotel. So I would love to, I'm actually working also on a book about my parents. My father was a diplomat, and we were in Moscow in the early 80s and sort of Cold War stuff. So I have this fantasy of doing something at that hotel. So I've been thinking about it. I mean, the hotels are consistent. I'm obsessed with hotels. Yeah, I've been thinking about it. But yeah, everybody watches you, just so you know. It's like wonder. I would just sit there and watch the planes. I mean, okay, so just I'm going to give you some context so you'll appreciate this. The image that's second from the top left, that's got the sort of bed in the front, and it's really hard to see the airplane with the two chairs. That is, I think that's the Marriott. No, that's the Sheraton Gateway. And because my friends know how much I love hotels. Actually, the hotel industry should hire me to stay in these hotels and do art. But she was visiting from Australia, and she knew how much I loved hotels, and I just graduated. This was pre-9/11, summer of 2001, and she said, come, I know how much you love hotels. You can stay in my hotel room. We'll get room service. We'll order champagne. And I was like, I'm there. I need a break. So I was there for the weekend, and I was sitting in the bed and just watching through the windows these planes coming in to land over and over and over again. And it was this amazing thing to think about all those people that are coming to Los Angeles. And that's what I mean why this project with the airplanes is so specific to LA, because I think about what is this city and what is the West, and this promise of manifest destiny that's very problematic, and that even La La Land, and it's this notion that the reason LA keeps getting bigger is because this promise is not yet over. People are still leaving their homes and moving to LA every day. Or there's this great Poison video from the 80s. I don't know how many remember Poison, but there's this great song, and the woman gets off the bus, right? And then there's Bret Michaels on a bike, and he saves her. But the very end of the video is another woman getting off the bus. So this kind of perpetual promise of Los Angeles is still active today in a way that I think is really, 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 really strong. And so, yeah, anyway, I'm digressing a little bit, but these specifically to me are about this notion of coming into and arriving into the imaginary of Los Angeles. But people are obsessed with planes anyway. Always.
That's true. I'm still obsessed.
So the point I was trying to make is that it was this beautiful thing, watching this kind of narrative and thinking about all the narratives of where these people were coming from and where they thought they were going, and doing it through this mediated window, which actually looks like a screen. It can be read as a screen, and some of the images that are farther down look like a screen. And this idea that this whole experience of Los Angeles is very much mediated through windows and car windows. It's not a walking city. It's, so that's the first, that's where I came up, that's where the project started, and thinking about what this kind of space can activate. And having that time to do it, which we don't have that much time to sit and look and think and ponder. I mean, and this is something that I also hope the work accomplishes, is to just have us slow down a little bit and really think about where we are, and not just rush ahead into this future. Los Angeles has this really complicated and interesting history that I'm very interested in exploring, and that sometimes gets lost in this future thinking, I think. So anyways.
Zoe, thank you so much. Yeah. I want to thank our panel for being here today. We have a small parting gift for each of you. It's inspired from our brain experience, which Drew, you might remember. So it's all the Nobel Prize laureates. Because we did so much creative brainstorming today, I think it's only appropriate that you all leave with a bit of that show. And
a plane ticket?
Huh?
A plane ticket?
A plane, maybe. So again, thank you all so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today as well. Thank you. Yeah, thanks.